declared Raphael Warnock the winner of the Georgia Senate race. Jon Ossoff has also claimed victory in the state's other Senate contest, and his lead over Republican David Perdue seems likely to grow beyond the recount margin. What's the latest there?
Yeah, I think that's very much the latest as you've described it. So last night we had Senator-elect Raphael Warnock come out and make what sounded very much like a victory speech. This morning we've had Jon Ossoff do very much the same, although his margin at the moment is sitting around 17,500 votes. There are still some additional votes to be counted from overseas ballots as well as military ballots. Although at this point it seems like his margin is both sufficient to keep him in the lead as well as likely to increase somewhat as the bulk of the outstanding votes come from Democratic counties or Democratic-leaning counties within the state of Georgia. What is interesting is that beyond Jon Ossoff himself claiming victory is that you had Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of the Democrats this morning come out and give a brief press conference where he spoke in very clear terms about the new Democratic majority in the Senate. He spoke about himself as the Senate Majority Leader once these new senators are sworn in. So, barring any surprises, and of course we have to wait for, official certification, but barring any surprises, it seems all but certain that the Democrats will have majority control of the Senate.
Now, Brad, as I'm speaking to you, we are also seeing live visuals of Trump supporters breaking barriers, saying they want to take the Capitol. If there were any doubts about whether Joe Biden's win in Georgia was authentic, the performance by the two Democrats on Tuesday surpassing the size of the president-elect's victory should erase this. The political playing field for the beginning of Joe Biden's presidency appears to be set in his favor. Is this an accurate assessment?
Yeah, I think that it is. I mean, of course, he's in a favorable position when he has control or the Democrats rather have control of both houses of Congress. I think you're correct in saying that the size of the win that we're finding with these two Democrats in Georgia outsizing Joe Biden's win. That should put this whole idea to rest, but so should the court cases that didn't go anywhere. So should the several recounts that took place in the state of Georgia. So should the Republican officials of the state of Georgia, including the governor, coming out and saying that this was a fair and unaffected election within the state. And so, Trump and his supporters are running off of unfounded sort of conspiracy theories, and they've yet to provide any proof. So I think to a rational mind, yes, this does put any lasting issues to bed, but it's not going to make much of a difference to Trump and his base.
But seemingly it seems like they are fighting a lost cause here. But still, they are not backing down. I mean, US President Donald Trump is still alleging electoral fraud, and his supporters are clearly willing to take this campaign to the Capitol.
Yeah, it's astounding. I mean, just a couple of minutes before you and I connected, we had actually the protesters, pro-Trump protesters, they actually did storm the Capitol. They breached the barriers, they got past security, and they've literally got live video feed of protesters walking throughout the Capitol building with all of their gear, some taking pictures, some moving into other parts of the Capitol building, many carrying flags. And so you've got sort of veterans of the American news media saying that in their entire careers, they've never seen anything like this. So, despite any sort of rational norm of American democracy and accurate and fair elections, this seems to be where we are right now.
Yeah. So if Ossoff prevails, Democrats will achieve a 50-50 split and take control of the U.S. Senate once Kamala Harris, who can break ties in the chamber, is sworn in as the vice president on the 20th of January. Talk us through some of the repercussions from Tuesday's ballot in the Peach State.
Yeah, I think it changes the sort of tenor of the Biden administration as we move towards January 20th. Everything from the confirmation of his cabinet picks to which legislation gets on the floor is now a different scenario. The assumption had been, and the conventional wisdom dictated, that the Republicans would hold a slight majority, and Mitch McConnell would remain the Senate Majority Leader. And so this is a little bit of a turnaround than what was expected. And so it means that the Democrats will be able to at least get the legislation they want on the floor for a vote. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader today, did say that the first priority of the Congress, both houses, will be to get additional stimulus checks to Americans on the floor. That was a vote that recently passed for $600, but they're trying to get that up to $2,000, and Republicans have refused to budge on that. So that's one of the first things that they'll do. And I think continually we'll see, the other implication of Democrats having the majority means that on every committee within the Senate, you've got a Democratic chair instead of a Republican chair, which means they get to set the sort of calendar for hearings to confirm Joe Biden's nominees. And also with that majority, they will be able to largely approve anyone that he wishes to appoint. Sources are saying this morning that Joe Biden is looking to nominate Merrick Garland as the Attorney General of the United States. And for those who remember, Merrick Garland was nominated by Barack Obama when he was president in his final year,
right,
for the Supreme Court vacancy from Justice Alito. So it's going to be interesting, but certainly it changes the overall tenor and gives a lot of the power back to Joe Biden.
Well, Brad, please stay put. We just want to take a look at those live visuals at the Capitol. It seems that police have now entered the premises or the precinct as Trump supporters continue with their protests. Now, these are live visuals coming from the U.S. House and Senate. Now, elected officials have convened a joint sitting of Congress to tally electoral votes from all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Police are getting into that area as protesters have earlier been seen breaking barriers, saying that they want to take the Capitol. Now, as you see there, police have entered the precinct, and worryingly, the country is still in the midst of a pandemic, and there's little wearing of masks or social distancing, as quite a number of people have come out in their numbers in support of the President Donald Trump, also urging, or rather reiterating these calls that he's been giving in recent days, saying that the fraud or the election results are fraudulent. Now, supporters have come out in their numbers on the Capitol and have also broken the barrier. So, Brad, I want to bring you back here. As you are seeing these worrying scenes playing out in the Capitol, people or President Trump supporters are still out in their numbers, and police and other law enforcement officials now being forced to intervene in this matter as the supporters have broken the barrier. Let's just speak about the support that's been given for the president. Clearly, this is not foundering. I mean, his supporters are taking heed from him and also reiterating that the results of the election were fraudulent.
Yeah, the sort of adherence to what he says is total and complete. Whether it is that the election is fraudulent and so therefore let's not bother to go out and vote in the Georgia Senate runoff that we've just seen, or whether it is come and protest perfectly legitimate results like they're doing now. Now, I mean, of course, they have their right as Americans to protest, but of course, they're taking it to this the new level where they now breach the Capitol, which is interrupting the joint session of Congress to verify and certify the electoral results. You also had, you've also had Trump this morning tweeting that, the last defense for this election is our great Mike Pence, he says, and this idea that Mike Pence is somehow going to reverse the election for him. And Mike Pence has been very clear that he cannot do that. He doesn't have the authority to do that. And he's certainly not even going to try to do that because it's not the right thing. And Donald Trump sort of sent him a warning shot saying this could be damaging for you politically. And so by sort of tweeting preemptively saying that he is the last defense of Donald Trump's cause, he just had endless numbers of comments on Twitter and Facebook saying, thank goodness we have Mike Pence and keep fighting the good fight, and we cannot let this fraudulent process take over our country. And there's just zero critical thinking on the table when it comes to this. There's the fact that they've lost 62 lawsuits related to this election in the courts, mostly decided by Republican judges, and a number of them by Republican judges appointed by President Trump. It escapes their thinking altogether.
So we know that one of the president's favorite forms of communication is Twitter. And yeah, he's gone back to tweet about the developments right now, saying Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution. I quote, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth. What exactly is the president talking about here? Has he lost the plot?
I mean, I have to think so. Firstly, they've not had the certification has not been completed. Yeah. They really got to the third state in alphabetical order, which is Arizona, before Republicans objected to certifying those results. And that means that the joint session of Congress breaks into the two different houses for 2 hours of debate. And that was underway before it had to get halted due to the breach of the Capitol by pro-Trump protesters. So that's kind of the first component. But again, this idea that Mike Pence didn't have the courage, really courage has nothing to do with what's going on. The role of the vice president and in his role as president of the Senate in this context, according to the Constitution, is very clear. His role is to open the envelopes and read out the numbers that are there. And that is it. There's no debate, there's no discussion, and there's no opinion on the matter. So this isn't about Mike Pence. This is about Donald Trump, his inability to lose, his inability to accept that he lost, and he lost fair and square. This isn't a matter of fraud.
Let's continue our chat with Brad Price. Of course, a reminder of that story. U.S. media outlets have declared Raphael Warnock the winner of the Georgia Senate race. John Ossoff has also claimed victory in the state's other Senate contest, and his lead over Republican David Perdue seems likely to grow beyond the recount margin. And as we speak right now, these are live scenes in the U.S. where protests are playing out, coming from the U.S. House and Senate. Now, elected officials have convened a joint session of Congress to tally the electoral votes from all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Let's bring in Brad Price again to talk us through what's happening in the U.S. Brad, look, the U.S. is still in the midst of a pandemic, and like I was saying, those scenes that we are seeing playing out at the Capitol are quite concerning, with very little social distancing and people not wearing masks. And of course, there's also a curfew that's set to be implemented. Talk us through some of the regulations in that country.
Yeah, the curfew just came in for 6 p.m., which is in about 4 hours on the East Coast time zone, which will help the law enforcement, hopefully, to try and sort of enforce calm on the streets. The general sort of process of rules and regulations around COVID protections in the states are just so varied, because in each case they're up to the states, and typically the states delegate the authority to local officials at the sort of city and county level. And so, I in fact live pretty close to the border of Collin County. I live in Dallas County, and I can literally sort of drive 2 minutes up the road and be in a different set of rules. So it's kind of rather strange from that perspective. It does seem, however, that despite keeping some basic rules in place, elected officials in the US have been very clear that there's no appetite for another lockdown, despite, for example, Boris Johnson in the UK initiating another nationwide lockdown over there. So it's really just kind of, by now, the American population has accepted to some degree that the only way out of this is through vaccination. And even that process is not going as smoothly as expected. Originally, we were told by officials from Operation Warp Speed and the leaders of the sort of fight against COVID within the government that we would have 20 million vaccines delivered within and initiated within by the end of December 2020. We're now into the first week of January, and we still have only about 4 or 5 million people who have received vaccinations. So, a protest like this, where you've got, in fact, a bunch of people who really kind of deny that COVID even exists, they think it's a hoax. Why would they social distance? Why would they wear masks? And the problem is that we're in an incredibly high peak within the COVID pandemic right now. We've reached over 20 million infections within the US, and that number doubled over the last 8 weeks. So it took us, 9 months to get 10 million infections and 8 weeks to get another 10 million infections. So it's just kind of an astonishing position to be in. And all of these folks that we're seeing on the screen now, they're coming in from different cities and different states, and they're all going to be going back home after this. And the kind of community spread that happens from an event like this is, it's really kind of hard to describe, because it's exponential in every way.
Now, of course, we've seen similar protests by Trump supporters before, and more notably in recent days, we also saw the arrest of the leader of the Proud Boys. And of course, these protests, or similar protests to these, have raised red flags with the police officials, and it seems they have their hands full.
Yeah, one of the difficulty with right-wing protests is that they tend to be very sort of pro-Second Amendment people, right, which is the right to carry and bear arms. And so there's always this sort of concern of, well, are they going to come armed, and if so, how many? And you kind of get this very militant sense out of some of these protests. And these are the same folks who say, when the left protests, that they're thugs and they're rioters and they're just out to destroy. And now you've got, a very similar kind of situation with folks on the right. So I think it's really just a matter of, you can protest peacefully or not. But certainly this kind of adherence towards Second Amendment rights does make the police nervous. And every time we know that one of these protests is coming, the mayor of that city and the police chief of that city typically brace themselves for any kind of protection they can, including in some instances bringing the National Guard when necessary, because there is this fear of violence.
So I also want us to go back to the tweets that we are seeing coming from the US president. If you just bear with me now as my team puts it up. It says here that please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful. Now, is this a reassuring message from the president? And what should it say? What kind of message should it signal, not just to the police, but also his supporters?
Yeah, look, I think, stay peaceful is the right thing to be saying, but it's a bit late for that.
Yeah.
He called for these protests. He encouraged these protests. He said that they should happen on this day. And he was very clear that, his supporters must not let this, what they're calling takeover, happen. And so, you can tweet stay peaceful, but we've also seen video already come in of protesters physically attacking Secret Service agents, Capitol Police, and DC Police. So, how many of those guys, while they're walking around and getting into scuffles and breaching the perimeter, are actually sitting on their phones looking at the president's tweets?
I also want us to look into the future. I mean, past the Donald Trump tenure, there's also hope for Biden's agenda. For 2 years, the Republican-controlled Senate bottled up virtually every piece of legislation coming out of the Democratic-controlled House of Representatives. Now, with the Georgia victory, that blockage will be removed. Of course, this is good news for Biden's rather extensive legislative agenda. Talk us through some of the issues, including healthcare, the environment, government reform, and the economy in the U.S.
Yeah, look, we've had the Republicans for a long time. I mean, throughout the Obama years, trying to repeal and replace Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, which they have failed to do several times over. And so, that assault would have likely continued, which, we now know for the next 2 years at least that the Affordable Care Act will remain in place. And President-elect Biden has been very clear that he thinks that that bill needs a number of improvements and that he wants to work to expand healthcare to more and more Americans, and to make healthcare accessible and affordable for Americans. On the climate front, he has a pretty aggressive plan of implementing green infrastructure, and along with that, a number of green jobs that come with it. Certainly moving towards things like the use of electric cars and having charging stations throughout the country, and the kinds of jobs that initiatives like that create. And so, but at the same time, I think there's also some comfort for those who are kind of scared of what's being described as this radical left socialist takeover. And part of that is just fear that's been drummed up by Trump. And some of it is that there are far left-leaning, Americans and elected officials. But Joe Biden is generally seen as someone who is able to work across the aisle, is able to get things done in a reasonable manner. And certainly having a 50-50 split with Vice President-elect Kamala Harris being the deciding vote, there's not a whole lot of appetite at this point for there to be these radical left policies implemented, because there's not even enough support for them on the Democratic side. So I think that very narrow majority that they have is giving some folks on the right a little bit of comfort, even if it is just a little bit.
Now, Brad, our time is running out, but I also want to pick your brain just regarding what Biden presidency will mean for relations with Africa.
Yeah, look, I think that Joe Biden is, he's got established relationships with leaders throughout the world, and he's got an extensive kind of background as it links to South Africa specifically, and Africa more broadly. He was a vocal opponent of apartheid when he was newly elected in the Senate, and has been to South Africa on many occasions, including the inauguration of Nelson Mandela when he was elected president. And so it's a part of the world that he cares deeply for. And I think that his respect for the dignity of all people, and his passion for equal rights as well as kind of equality on the global stage, puts us in a really good position for U.S. and Africa, broadly African relations to proceed in a really positive direction.
Well, Brad, thank you very much for your time. That was Brad Price in conversation with us about the U.S. Senate vote